Hi everybody. It's nice to be here. It's nice to be among like-minded people, and I was a little concerned about following Gleb. I thought, boy, that's going to be a tough act to follow. But as it turns out, I'm a mini Gleb. So everything he said, I believe. And what I'm going to show you today is the perspective of someone who's been inside for, oh my God, longer than I want to admit. You know, I've been a classic corporate dweeb. I studied civil, but I didn't want to build theodolites and surveying equipment. So I went into corporate real estate, and I see Sam here at HP. That was one of my first jobs because I was a civil. So I landed in corporate real estate not knowing what it was. And I was the only woman, and everybody there was probably 100 years old. And now I'm 100 years old, so now I can tell you about it. So I have more scar tissue than most people I know. But I also learned early on from the likes of people like Bosty, if anyone even knows Mike Brill or who he was one of the early environmental psychologists with a company called Bosty, Boston Organization of Social and Technological Innovation. And this was 30 years ago. So these things are not new. And Gleb said that, and I'm glad he said that because they're not. And the word hybrid has now gotten very popular, but in my experience, the spectrum has always been there. There's always been people, and I love the D&I perspective because there have always been veterans who weren't able to come in and weren't able to work. There's always been people in populations that didn't have the benefit of being in a large city or being in a large office. So I have been, I guess, a missionary for liberating the workforce, and because that's who does the work. And having learned from Mike Brill, having learned from Frank Duffy at DEGW, one of the best early firms doing, oh, hi, Harold. So I've got someone here from Sun, I have someone here from Genentech, which is awesome because they can check me if I say stuff that's wrong. And I don't have answers. So the beauty of the work that we're doing collaboratively is that we get to figure it out together. And my main methodology is called strategic choice, and I think you see that. And as I learn how to advance slides, what I'll tell you is that my focus is really about a systemic approach to what I call the container. So some of you are into the building part, which obviously is the physical part. Many of you here on the social side who understands the dynamics of work from a social perspective, and then many of you are technologists, which is fabulous because for years now, we've been looking for who will do the integration, who does the systemic integration of those functions. They tend to be siloed, they tend to have their own budgets in corporations. And I've worked in IT, I've worked for the HR, I'll tell you about the VP of HR at Sun. I worked for him, and and also in real estate, so and for the CFO. So these folks in the C-suite, they want the company to succeed, but you know, it's a very interesting time right now. So it's a wonderful opportunity for us to learn and collect data, because data is the trick to getting people to understand why. And when I was in engineering, it was always about the how. You know, how do things get done, and it's okay if you break it because we'll fix it. In science, it's about the why. So when I went from Sun to Genentech, it was a completely different culture. And they're PhDs and they're really, really smart. It's not like the Sun people weren't really, really smart, but they just want to get shit done. And in science, they want to know why. They can't kill the rats because they're using the rats to figure out how to save lives. Very different culture, but all of these issues show up there as well. The jobs don't matter. It's just being a human being. So from the beginning, you know, we've always said it's really not about the building. It's about the way we work. And if we can figure out a way to do this together collaboratively with the people themselves who are doing the work, that's what this methodology will show. So, I'm open to questions throughout. I'm pretty flexible and I'm pretty open about taking questions as we go along. So the logic, and this came from Ken Alvarez, whom you probably remember. He was the executive VP of HR at Sun, and I reported into him. And at the time, I was working with Mike Brill at Bosty, and he had all these fabulous, flexible ways of working. And I was in real estate, right? I was in real estate. I reported to HR, but I was in real estate. So the mission at Sun was the network is the computer, distributed work, right? You don't really have to come in. You can do your work from anywhere, and this was 30 years ago. Some of the technology wasn't there yet. So some of the laptops didn't work when you came into the office, but it was early and very thoughtful. And Ken Alvarez, who was an IO guy from Bowling Green, was asking me, how do you know that what Mike Brill is saying about, the office environment for groups, group collaboration, better than individual. The cube is the worst thing in the world. It's not good for privacy. It's not good for group, so get rid of the cube. And I believed that. I drank the Kool-Aid. But Ken made me get analytic about it. So as much as I did not enjoy working for him, because every time I went back to him with something, he'd say, that's not it, go back and do something else. I did. And this logic is sort of based on what I would call causality. And on the right side, you'll see what everybody calls productivity. Believe me, don't try to measure it. I've been trying for 30 years because there's so many variables in terms of the productivity. Like, what is the business outcome? Is it increased revenue? Is it reduced cycle time? Is it increased relationship with customers? It's an outcome. It's a noun. But what is really the magic is the key work practices. What are the people doing to achieve those things? And there is a linkage there. And it's mildly direct, but it's really hard to measure. Now, what isn't hard to measure is the impact of the work environment on those work practices. So my focus and my metric is the work practices. And given all the neat stuff that we can do now, there's probably ways beyond just survey to do some unobtrusive stuff in that space, which would be awesome. Because everyone says surveys, what time of day is it, who you're talking to, is it summertime, nobody's here. There's always something that somebody can tell you about your data. But if it's really pretty easy and logical and fact-based, people who do the work know what they're doing. And they know when they're doing the work that they're being asked to do. That's how performance evaluations are written. But the way the methodology works, the way that I've used it, and I've used this inside companies, and now that I'm advising, I'm using it with my clients, one of whom may show up later today. The co-creation process is the magic. So there's no need for change management here. It's embedded in the process. And what I do and what we do when I have colleagues who work with me is we start on the right and we do the reverse engineering. So we don't even talk about the work environment. That's our domain. Don't let your clients do that. They don't know. And we're beyond, I need a corner office and I need a soft chair and I need this, I need that, but you'll still get that. You know you will. But you try to put that aside and have them focus on what they know, and what they should know is, what are they trying to do? What exactly are your desired business outcomes? And in that space, we generally do interviews. And we interview executives, we interview the CEO, the C-suite. They're the ones who are responsible for P&L and for shareholder value and for retention, you name it. The senior people should know what they're trying to do. Now, what they don't know, but what the people know, is in the middle. So once you've got these wonderful, probably a handful, 2, 3, 4, and they're not surprising, increasing revenue, doing more with less. I'll show you an example from a real client in a moment. But not rocket science. It's what the businesses are in business to do. You take that information, you can even do some primary stuff and do some research on goals, some research on what Hambrick and Quist is saying about the company. You bring that into focus groups. And the focus group is where the magic happens. If you get the right people, typically the doers, and don't put the supervisors and managers in with the doers, because often that changes the dynamic of the honesty and trust that gets developed. But in these focus groups, you bring in the outcomes. You say, okay, this is what your senior managers are telling you to do. Hopefully they'll recognize it. Sometimes they don't, because sometimes the cascading in these companies is so crummy that some of the goals at the high don't ever make it down. Well, that's a story about middle management. That's another meeting. But this is generally understood by the focus groups. And with the complexion of maybe 12 people, often cross-functional, depending on how the teams work, you go in, you show them the goals, and you ask them, when you're doing your best work, what are you doing? And I want verbs. I don't want to know that you need a laptop. I don't want to know that you need a chair. I want to know, and they always say collaborate. But as Gleb said, What kind of collaboration? There's gazillion types. There's one-to-one, there's one-to-many, there's virtual, there's face, there's so many, and they're all good, and they're all valid, and they're all good for different purposes. So I think we often forget some of the tacit exchange is very, very difficult today with technology as it is. Now I think with AI and with Meta and with all the new stuff, I mean, I was an early adopter of I can't remember what it's called now, isn't that funny? The system, the next gen avatar, what was that called? Second Life. And it was a nightmare. But we adopted it, we tried to work with it at Sun, and it just was really hard. So the face-to-face stuff was still very important then. Get all of those behaviors. A lot of it's going to be conflicting, because some of it's I need quiet, and some of it's I need wild activity, and you have to be able to do both. You can't, it's got to have an and. You have a question? Can you speak up, because I don't think people can hear you.
Yeah. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Oh, better. Thank you. So I have a question here. While we're talking about I need a quiet place or I need a vibrant environment, do you also think about the mood? Because we are behavioral people. Some days my mood is to work in the vibrant environment, but some days I'm depressed. Oh, yeah. I have a sad mood. So how does that fits into the key work practices and designing your workplace?
I will show you, because there's several different, and any one human being will most likely do more than one behavior during the course of the day.
And how the workplace dynamically changes to suit that.
Absolutely. Now, I didn't bring pictures of some of our physical work environments, but we can definitely talk about it. It's a variety of different places, and any individual knows when they're trying to do heads down, they don't want to be interrupted. And, you know, seeing people wearing, you know, headsets and sending social signals don't bother me. We can do better than that. So then you take these work practices that they have identified and the work environment prototypes. What I say by prototype is it's an experiment. And when you do that with a client group that has now engaged, because they think you're going to build something that's going to help them do what they're trying to do, the change management goes away, because they're already adopting, you know, some new solutions and they're helping design it. And really important here is that the work environment is not just physical. The reason it's a triangle is that we've always tried to create a systemic environment where social, technological practices really ought to drive the physical. The physical needn't come first. I mean, you think about startups working in basements, they figure out a way to do it. And at the time, that was good for them, and as they grow, things change. But I'll give you one slide. The next slide is actually kind of funny because it's from 2014. And my colleague, Karen, will recognize Michelle Rohrer, who now is very, very senior at Genentech. I didn't ask permission to show this, so don't bust me. But this was way back in 2014, and what she noticed was they were out of space. And I was and Sam, you'll know, I had space management, and people were telling me I'm out of space. It's like, no, you're not. The space is half empty, for God's sake. But it was all owned, and so nobody would touch somebody else's space. So she was fabulous, and having a client in the business who's responsible for the business outcomes, actually getting this and supporting it is magic, because they are speaking the business of the business, and they are interested, and she was fabulous about telling her people, because she was doing product development, which was in between research and manufacturing, very important function. And she would say to her people, we're so interested in our patients and what they need. I would really like us to be interested in ourselves and what we need. And she was amazing. So it was really lucky to get someone who was such a thought leader. But in those days, we were out of space, right? Now we have too much space. To be honest with you, it's the same thing. There's no difference there. The space is not working. So here is the real.
It says N double.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Let me go back if I know how to do that. Oh, we called it neighborhood work environments. I'm so sorry. I didn't realize that we loved acronyms at Sun. we love them at Sun, and we love them at Genentech too. But the concept there when we were at Sun, at Genentech, was that people were out of the office half the time, and when they were in, they didn't have the right space because there were all these cubes. And the senior people had offices, and the junior people had cubes. And all the conference rooms are always full. I mean, that's happening now with my client right now, even though it's a high-tech company and they're very distributed and they know how to work in a distributed way. When you do come in to collaborate, you get tables and chairs and conference rooms. It's just not going to work. So even this current client is trying to figure out, how do we change our container to allow for the diversity, the spectrum of everything from home to when you come in. So this next slide, I think I'll dwell on, and I also want to make up for some lost time with you if I can. Again, this was from Genentech, so this is real data, or testimonials or information that we collected in 2014. When we interviewed the VPs and the executives, I think you'll see some of these are still true. More with less is more true now than it was then. Innovative process, I mean, really. The question is, how do you measure that, right? I'm not going to measure that. The business measures that. That's why they're in business. And if they don't know how to do that, they shouldn't be in business. Often you're getting employee engagement, less so now. Really interesting. It's like people now have kind of lost the whole employee engagement thing. And then, of course, cross-organization knowledge has been important for years. It's becoming increasingly so. But then when we took this information into these focus groups with people who do the work, in those days, they wanted to leverage technology more. That's still true. The better technology gets, the more we want to leverage it because it makes our lives easier in theory. Unless everyone's using something different, then you got a problem. More informal interactions because they were very isolated in terms of where they sat and basically did a lot of heads down. And also they did a lot of global work. And we were talking earlier about how when you're doing global teams, informal stuff is tough. You know, you gotta either figure out how to Slack somebody and wake them up at night. The informal stuff continues to be pretty tricky if you're in a virtual setting. Time and distance, what at the time was no longer a factor, now it's become the rage, right? Time is the most valuable resource, and commuting is the worst possible thing you can do. Finally, people are waking up that it's not good for the environment either, and especially airplanes. And in those days, people were flying to Basel and flying back to the Bay Area and flying to Basel. A lot of money on those trips and a lot of junk going into the air that we're now paying more attention to. So we took all of that information, pulled out our little kit of parts, which we called a pattern book. And I can get a ton of detail on that. I didn't bring it with me, but each one of those 3 systemically linked elements has a whole book of enablers. So an example is in, the tech. There's all kinds of tech. There's fixed tech, there's remote tech, there's collaboration tech. It really is a huge bucket, and it's getting bigger and bigger. In the old days, it was either fixed or remote. Now it's all of the above. Video, what kinds of video? Zoom, the only thing you got in town, we got to do better than that. Physical, that is a kit of parts that has always included home. A network of places has always been a vision of how a company could work. Having a hub where there's some identity, like we identify with Haas Business School, we identify with Hoover Tower, we identify with physical things because we're human. But that doesn't mean we have to go there every day. It just means we identify with place. So place is important, and when we do want to be with people and we want to press the flesh and we want to do the tacit exchange, that's still kind of hard on Zoom. It's being done, and some people are doing it really well. However, I do still believe, and we see this with our children, the COVID experience hurt them. And some of our kids who weren't going to school, I mean, they were being homeschooled, I'm sure some parents were good at it, but they missed the interaction with, when you're little, you need that tacit exchange. You have to watch people. You have to see the body language, which is today still difficult with video. And then, of course, the social, in my experience, is getting increasingly important. And something that you can take away from the social, team agreements. It's just making implicit behavior explicit, so you can set expectations within your team. What are your hours? When can I bother you? And most teams do that implicitly. But when it gets tricky, and Karen, you'll remember this, most of our clients are on multiple teams. So, they have an expertise, they have a functional expertise, but they're on many different teams, so it gets a little crazy making because you've got to have some sort of understanding of how your team's going to operate, and it's not just one team. Now, you as an individual may have your own preferences. Preferences are really important. You know, the ability of the work, is the work supported, and is your preference being acknowledged? Those three things work together. And when you create a group, you're going to have 10 or 12 individual differences that have to be aggregated so that you can work as a team. That's always been true. But now I think it's really important to make it more explicit. So one of the enablers in the pattern book is team agreements, and they're really simple. It's not a legal contract. It's just an explicit expression of how the team's going to operate in terms of expectations, and having the team feel comfortable that they can manage each other. So that if someone's not pulling their weight, they don't go to the boss and complain, they do it live within the team. And these are some new behaviors. Now, I think we were saying earlier, the millennials kind of do this a little better than some of the older folks. And I'm watching, you know, the trust that gets sort of assumed and then tested, as opposed to before we used to have to be face-to-face to develop the trust. I think a lot of that's changing. So actually this slide is very important, and then this slide is very important, because the metrics frame, not only is the change management embedded because you take the client through the whole process and they work with the pattern book to develop their container, the metrics architecture is very important. I don't know if Gleb's still here, but the pre-survey that gets done with the today state, which is really about, okay, let's go back here for a sec. Today, you're in your current environment. How well are you able to leverage technology? How are your informal interactions working? You know, you do a pre-survey, then you build the prototype, which is not meant to be the final version. It needs to iterate. Then you go back and you survey 6 months after, ask the same questions. And hopefully it's got a northern movement so that whatever you've built here, and more times than not, the group environment, so I can sort of graphically explain what these physical work environments look like, but it's really the choice of technology that the team decides to use, you know, in terms of knowledge management. It's the practices that they need to articulate so that they can establish trust among each other, and then the space just needs to be a place where they can do a multiplicity of things during the course of a day. And that's hard. It's hard. You don't know how to size it sometimes. So you base it on utilization data, you base it on what they tell you. You start with something, it's shared. These environments are not, they're owned by the team, but the individual spaces, in order to take advantage of all of them, you got to be able to use the team room. If you want to preserve state, the team has to decide we're going to preserve state. You know, there's quiet spaces. If someone hogs them all the time, then someone needs to go over there and say, hey, is this all you do? You know, maybe you can do that at home so I can use the quiet space when we're in the office. So there's a lot of open, transparent testing, and it's testing, and it's iterating. So the idea of getting the client involved, and you'd be amazed, they actually kind of like it. And it doesn't take a lot of time. It's not rocket science. The pattern book is pretty clear. What they do is clear. How they plan to get their business stuff done is clear. So it's kind of a neat little, you know, and thank you, Ken Alvarez. As much as I did not enjoy working for him, it was a very valuable lesson. Harold, you're going to say something about Sun. I know you are. From 100 years ago.
Tell us some juicy stories. No, I just wanted to say I love the framework, and I'm curious if you have applied it across organizations. So not just within one organization, but if you think ecosystem, value chains, I think there's a lot of practices that I could imagine you could
It's
apply.
really interesting that you say that. At Sun, we started with product development. And if any of you know life sciences, you know that that's kind of, well, the researchers are the crown jewels, obviously. And as you go further down the food chain, it, in theory, gets a little easier. So the researchers, holy, 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 holy grail. Product development, though, is really important because they take that and they turn it into something that can be met, and they deal with the government. And they deal with, you know, all of the regulations and in life sciences. So she was a fabulous, I was lucky We were lucky to get her because she's in the middle. So she could look upstream and she could look downstream. My current client is really interesting, and I don't think Sophia's here, but she can tell you about it. They are a small-ish, 6,000, where 12 versus Sun, that was what, 30, 40? They are in a technology space that's very competitive with large companies like Microsoft, but they have a niche space. And they're trying to get their engineers to spend more time with sales. Now, you're talking two completely different cultures, right? You got the introverts who are really, really smart doing the coding, and you got the sales guys who are really, really gregarious because they're trying to make the sales. So we're in the process of doing a neighborhood where about 60 different team people, completely cross-functional, but within engineering, which is kind of cool. And we're going to put sales folks near them, not with them, but near them, because I don't know how that's going to work. But the work practices are still collaboration, speeding up, doing more with less, which ends up being true for not just engineering, but for sales. But it is a new experiment. I have never mixed engineers and sales folks. So is that kind of what you're talking about in terms of different work practices?
Different companies, like co-innovation with your customers versus just within one organization.
Oh, no. What an interesting thought. I mean, I've done work with Liquid Space, but they're a supplier. I've not done what you're talking about, which could be really interesting. No, I just have done this client and that client. And ironically, even though it's life sciences versus high tech, they're not that different, in terms of the nature of work. It's collaborating, it's quiet, and all of the above. Yeah, no, that'd be cool. Let's talk about that. Any other thoughts, questions? This iteration is really important, and you've got to have the funding for it. And many times you don't. Many times you build something and space is not as fungible as it could be. So it's very hard to go back and tear stuff out. But the commitment here is that you go small, you invest in the proper environment and the proper tools, you test it, and if it's not working, you go back and change it. So that's part of the process. And these things take time, but it's worth it.
From a real estate perspective, how do people determine the analytics on doing proper space planning, like using sensors now within the facility to give you better line of sight
Yeah.
on understanding where the workloads are actually working at? How do you go back?
What the question has to do with basically tracking utilization. Isn't that kind of what you're saying? I get it, and it's okay because the next generation doesn't mind it as much. Really, I mean, we used to get completely freaked out about privacy, it's like, all your crap on your phone, everybody knows it already. So the privacy thing is weakening a little bit, and the new tools are quite fabulous. I mean, at Genentech, we started an analytics group, and we deployed Refinity sensors, not place-based, but ceiling-based. And it was quite remarkable because you really can't. They used that stuff during the COVID. I was gone by then. I left during COVID. But by then they were using all the sensors to figure out how to keep people safe because everybody's going into conference rooms and they weren't supposed to do that. They were sitting next to each other and they may or may not have been wearing masks. So the sensors are fabulous. But you have to be transparent about it. You can't not tell people. You have to tell them. And many times they believe it's for their own good. Is that kind of in the vein of where you were going? Because I think that's really important. And in my day, in the early day, we had walkthroughs. They were called bed checks because we didn't have the technology. So we had people, traipsing through neighborhoods, counting. Well, that person's jacket's there, so I guess they're in. But, it was invasive and it freaked people out. So the sensor thing is very cool. And I think the concept of join is phenomenal. Absolutely phenomenal. Because, with the data, you can talk to the CEO. CEO doesn't want to even talk to you if you're talking real estate because it's not important. Now, people attrition, that's important. So now the CEO may talk to you if you have data about how his or her people are coming or leaving.
I have a comment about sensors, and I'm wondering how people are feeling about it. And that is, sensors can track what people do, and on a group level, and they don't even want to get to tracking an individual, what that person does, but that is actually what is important, where people actually go. But it doesn't track people's decision where to go. And so a lot of the reservation system technology doesn't track failures. That a person wants to request a space and is denied. And the psychology about this is that if you're denied a certain number of times, you quit asking.
Yeah, that's right.
But the same thing is true of tracking where people are going. If one has an experience of walking through the space, oh, occupied, oh, occupied,
Right.
oh, occupied, I'm not going to bother to get out of my chair and go check a room. So we really have to upgrade what that information provides, because all the optimization software people I've talked to so far, they're not tracking failures. And how do you combine that with
Yeah.
the decision making?
Yeah.
Interesting to then also add an element. If someone is asked 3 times on a Tuesday to get a reservation, Monday, they tried this last 3 times, did you want the service to open right now?
Huh.
So that's the
Part of
proactive.
my bias, and let me just express my bias, and then I'll hopefully want to hear the rest of you. Some of this is belief-based too, right? So it's not all fact-based. But my bias is I don't like reservation systems. They're just, to me, and that's probably because they're still clunky, but it is an additional bit of work that I'd have to do. And so the magic is sizing the neighborhood properly so that when you do come in, you will be able to be assured that you'll have a place to work. It may not be your desired little phone booth, but there'll be a place to work. So that, because the for me, the jury's out on reservation systems. I like the sensors because it gives the service providers information about hotspots. And what's nice about that is you kind of know, wow, these team spaces are really being used. The open studios, maybe for like a stop and to chat with colleagues. Laptop bars are always heavily used for socialization, but all those elements go into the mixture. But yeah, no, the reservation, I don't know. I'd love to hear more. Sorry?
Coming into the office only 1 or 2 days a week, wayfinding is a huge challenge. The reservation system
It's true.
really helps.
But if you have neighborhoods with identified anchors,
Yes,
then you know
that's
where
key.
to go.
I think that's key for people that just don't know how to go into
But
an
a
office.
random office, especially if it's not flat, if it's this, it gets tough because getting on an elevator is like going to a different building in a high-rise building.
The
So,
wayfinding can be built
oh,
into that.
totally.
Right?
So you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right.
And I think that's where the technology will play a great role, where you have complex buildings, how to navigate which places available proactively, even before you're getting into that workplace, when you're just parking your car and tells that, okay, I see that you are in the premises, and I assume that you would need a workplace to sit.
Yeah.
Right?
No,
So
but I
that
think,
kind
I
of
think the
proactive
technology,
conversation
the
is
technology to show the hotspots is there.
Yes. Yes.
And it's just a matter of getting it onto somebody's iPhone so that, let's say I'm going to, that B35 in South City,
what
and it's a
how
7-story building.
do I see that is like, instead of being more responsive, it has to be proactively understanding the need of the employees and starting that conversation with the employees, which actually takes it to the whole set of a new experience for the employee while they're coming to office.
Yep. No, you're right.
So I had another question around, while you have been working with the life sciences and you talked about, right, different clients,
Yeah.
are they also looking at sustainability factor while they're designing the workspaces, and how big or how critical is that factor for them
the
today?
point is extremely important, and let me tell you why. More times than not, we think of these things in a silo. We think about the space, and then we think about the technology, and you're bringing up the sustainability, which is absolutely becoming incredibly more important than it used to be. In the old days, we were tracking CO2, and we had a sustainability organization that was responsible for that, but they didn't pay any attention to what we were doing in real estate. They were too busy, working with the governments on water and air. And I think now's the time to up-level what we do, to have it be systemic, and to have it include sustainability, because it's huge. The traffic, I live in Palo Alto, and coming up to the city was a nightmare. At first it was like a half an hour to get to South City. Then it was an hour and a half. It's like, oh, shit. And the commute is soul-crushing. And it's also dangerous for the environment. So I welcome up-leveling to include every element of this ecosystem, because it's bigger than just those 3 points.
So, it's important for you and me, but how much our clients are asking for it, and that parameter, what is the weightage in while they are working towards designing the workplace?
Well, you can reduce everything to dollars. You can. And dollar speaks. Even sustainability, you can reduce it to dollars. And if you can turn this data into a story and not just a spreadsheet, the CEO wants a story, and he or she wants to know how are you going to make him or her look good. That's all they care about. And that's okay, that's their job. And the people just want to be able to do their work, and do what they know they need to do. So it's an interesting time, and I really am so thrilled to be here. I know I'm out of time. I probably should stop, but I would love to stay with you for the rest of the day and learn from you, because every one of you has really valuable thoughts and opinions. And I do really value being here, and I thank you, Carl, for including me, because the Join mission is one that's very, very worthy. Thank you for your time.
Yeah, wonderful, Ann. Thank you for that. Bringing back some memories of Frank Duffy and others. And we're going to have a break now. We are about 25 minutes behind schedule, so I'm going to ask if you can be back in about, let's say, 10:50. And we've got drinks, food back here. And I've got a task now that Ann kind of brought that up, as you've all heard about the 6 degrees of separation from Kevin Bacon. In corporate real estate, it's 3 degrees separation from somebody you know that worked at HP or Sun. And so your goal is to find out who that is in the audience. So with that, let's take a 15-minute break, and we'll be back after that. Thank you.